we live in a ecosystem where humanity still sees itself as superior, where we put ourselves on top, and we exploit, rather than being part of the ecosystem where we see the interconnectedness and the interdependence. And nature will live on without us. People worry about the state of the world. I have no doubts that nature can live without humanity, but we cannot live without nature. And so how do we collaborate?
Mm-hmm. Welcome to the Intuitive You podcast, where we explore the concept of intuition from multiple perspectives, learn how intuition manifests itself and the various ways it is naturally utilized in our world and daily living. I'm your host, Chantal Denise Gosselin, a scientist, a lifelong seeker of knowledge, an intuition teacher, and a passionate educator. Get ready as we dive into the mysteries of intuition and discover how it can enhance our lives and change our world. So welcome everyone to the Intuitive You podcast. Thank you for tuning in. We have a very special guest today and a dear friend of mine, Christine Noble-Seller. I will introduce her and I will add more of what she does in the bio because she does so much. I cannot share everything right here on the spot, but Christine is an animal nature communicator and she supports families, animals in care, and wildlife everywhere around the world and raises awareness of intuitive interspecies communication through advocacy, consultations, education, sacred activism, and mentoring others wanting to make a difference and tune into their own intuitive communication abilities. She's also part of Sacred Activism Project. I'd like to mention the Heart Pride, which is a collaborative project with Animal Talk Africa and the Global White Lion Protection Trust. And you have one of your own, which is the Animal Communication Practice Group, which we'll talk about a little later on. And she's also donating a lot of her time, and she raised funds for local charity, her community at the Gananoque District Humane Society, Kingston Humane Society. And she's also a guest speaker. Christine, welcome. I am so honored to have you on the show today.
It's great to see you, Chantal. Thanks for the invitation. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Me too. I'm really looking to see where this is going to flow. So just so our listeners know, we have like a theme for each podcast, but because this podcast is about intuition, we also follow our own intuition and kind of like go with the flow. So I really enjoy doing these with people. First thing I would like to touch on before we dive into intuition in terms of interspecies animal communication is how I got to meet you. So I'd love to tell the story how and Christine came into my world, into my life. I was at a metaphysical show in Ottawa or Gatineau with my sister, and there was this table and this woman was there, and I wouldn't get a chance to talk at first because you were with a customer, you were with someone, but I grabbed your card and I was like, oh, animal communication. I've always been curious because I have an adopted cat. She's a stray. Her name is Nevi. She's beautiful, short hair, white, 2-eye colored cat. And I always wonder what's her story because, I didn't have her as a baby. And so, maybe this woman could help me out. So that's the reason that motivated me to reach out to Christine. And I noticed when I looked on your website that you were also offering a beginner's course to develop my own animal communication. And I was like, oh, why not? And I remember that, we did a little bit of that. So our first communication together, you allowed me to attempt communication with Nevi, and then we compare notes. And then I was shocked of how much things that I wrote down that you also picked up. And we don't even know each other. You don't even know Nevi, right? You use a picture. So just to share a little bit with our audience how it works. Christine has a picture of the animal and then ask for permission and then engage into the conversation. And so that was the first communication. And then we continued. At another time, I was going through a big international move during the pandemic in Colombia, in Bogota, and first time traveling by air with Nevi. She was very nervous just getting her from a 5-minute car ride to the vet. And I was like, how am I going to get a cat through a plane ride, 3 planes? Because I had to do Ottawa. I had to find my way to Fort Lauderdale and then Bogota, and it was a trek during the
And you
pandemic.
had a big stopover, as I recall, on the
I
way
did,
down.
yeah. I had to stay in this hotel for 2 nights, 3 days, and figure out the litter and just like the whole shebang. And so, yeah, that was making me very nervous to a point where I had my own doubts about bringing Nevi. I was like, maybe I should just like give her like away, as sad as it sounded, because I didn't want to like bring her through this. But I remember during one of our conversation, even before I brought up the Colombia trip, um, Nevi said something like, "Am I coming along?" And you didn't even know. I haven't even like started. And Nevi was like, "Am I coming?" And you're like, "Nevi wants to know if she's coming. Coming where?" You didn't even know. It was like, "Oh, she knows." How does she know? And so she was like, "You better bring me along because I want to come." And so you helped me out to prepare her. And speaking of the devil, she's right here. Hi.
Hello, sweetheart.
Yeah.
I'm glad she's shown up. I'm not
She's showing
surprised.
up. Yeah, she was on the hammock and now she's just here. And yeah, so we kind of just taught her what a plane is, and you helped me also in more practical ways with like the carry on and how to just leave it in the living room. And I'm sharing the story with our audience because if you have animals and you are going through a move, or you have to bring them to the vet and you're struggling with their anxiety and so on, you recommended the Bach remedy, which I know
Mhm.
you speak of
Yes.
yeah, a lot of, and you have your own story if you want to share with the Bach and your dog. And so rubbing the Bach remedy on Nevi's ear suited her during the plane ride and so on. And I used it for myself as well during the trip. And so that's kind of like how we cross path and the whole story. So
I love
thank you.
hearing that story again. And for anyone wondering what the Bach flower remedy
Yeah.
is, there are 38 of them, but most people know the most famous one, which is a separate one, which is rescue remedy.
Mhm.
So rescue remedy is the one that you can use for yourself, as Chantal uses, and she used with Nevi, and I use with my dog. Um, and I've used with many animals, and it's very effective. But there are many other remedies that you can use that are better suited. So
Yes, and the rescue remedy, there's a one for kids that is more suited for animals, correct? Because that one doesn't contain alcohol.
yeah, there is rescue remedy that is traditionally preserved in alcohol, grape brandy, and then you can also get the kid res rescue remedy or pet rescue remedy. They're all the same thing. The kids and the pet one is preserved in glycerin, which is vegetable
Yes.
oil, so it's greasier. But I do want to say, since this is Intuitive You, not that we're here to talk about the Bach flower remedy system, but it was created over 80 years ago by a medical doctor in England who was not satisfied with how doctors and medicine were treating patients, because patients had their own feelings about illness. And so he created he created a system. I don't know if it was the world's first, but he created a system that was based on emotions and
Mm,
spirituality. And
mm.
it was using his intuitive abilities as a healer.
There we go. I love that. I didn't know the story behind it. Thank you for sharing. That's very interesting. And so, yeah, if someone would want to get the Bach flower remedy, I know Amazon sells it, natural health food store. Do you have any other recommendation if someone wants to look into that?
If they Google Bach original flower remedies, this is a website created by Nelson Bach, which is the one pharmacy in the world that has been given permission by the Bach Center in the United Kingdom to manufacture and distribute the remedies. It's based in the US. They have a online directory, and you can key in where you live and
Oh,
the radius. So it's a geographical locator for stores in your area. And if you don't have any stores in your area, it will show you the online retailers that they may be global, or they may be specific to your country.
amazing. Okay, well, add that underneath the podcast as well. I always like to give listeners some tips as well, and ways to find the goodness that can make a difference in our lives. So
Absolutely.
now that we covered my story, let's talk about your story.
Okay.
And my first question is, how does one become a intuitive animal communicator? Well, did you have like a Dr. Dolittle moment? Because I feel like most people saw that, the Hollywood version of the Dr. Dolittle, and all of a sudden he can hear animals speaking. So how was it for you?
Sure. I think everyone has their own unique story. I actually haven't seen that movie. I've only seen clips.
Okay.
But it's easy to share my story, and know that there's no one way or right way. So animals have always been part of my life as well as nature. I grew up moving around. My father was a Canadian diplomat, so I was a very shy, introverted child. And I found every move different because culturally it was different and what was expected was different. And I went to different schools, and um, we always had cats, and I took great comfort in my cats.
Mm.
So, you know, being in nature is something we always did, being with animals, like most animal and nature lovers. But it wasn't till I was in my 30s that things started to really shift.
Mm.
And I had a series of personal crises, where I had what people from the outside might call a breakdown, but I'd call a break open.
Mm.
Personal health issues with our then 3-5-year-old child. And I call it a universal course correction. It's kind of like a let's wake up. And I took a meditation course when I was 37. And when I took that meditation course, two things happened. I'm an avid dreamer, a lucid dreamer, and it opened up repressed memories. So I
Mm.
realized that I had been a trauma survivor and was able to start my healing journey. At the same time, the other awakening that happened was an awakening to who I am, my true self, and the vastness of our beings. So it was a very interesting journey that they happened very intertwined and together. And then I'd probably say from the age of 37 to, I'm not quite sure, I don't remember what year that was. But let's fast forward to 2011, a few years later.
Yes.
And intuition, I've always been drawn to. I'm a Pisces on the zodiac, the 12th house, very intuitive, a little bit of all the zodiac within me. I'm very heart-based. I'm very gut-based. I think my trauma has made, and some people might find this an odd statement, but out of survival instinct, my observation skills became very heightened and
Mm.
very good out of necessity. But after I learned that I could trust myself again,
Mm-hmm.
because in trauma, we tend to learn mistakenly that we may be at fault, or that we can't trust ourselves, or we can't trust what we're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But I've since learned otherwise. So I ended up at an online event, well before COVID, and it was just like an audio, and it was something on Hay House, because I watch medium shows, and the first time that I had seen an actual animal communicator was Sonia Fitzpatrick on the Animal Planet show, and anything that seemed kind of out there to others was just natural for
Appealing.
me. It was just what I was drawn to. It was just like pulled me in. Like I found it fascinating. I didn't question it. It was just like, oh, wow. So the Hay House author that was speaking had won this contest, and she was an animal communicator. So we had this animal communication session. I mean, a group with probably hundreds of thousands of people, but she took us through a guided meditation. And this I'm going to share with you. And this is very specifically what set me on my journey. So I can see, they say life is lived forward, but, looking backwards in hindsight, you can see all the sequential prerequisites. You can see what led up to this point. So one of the traumatic events I had as a child was living overseas, on the west coast of Africa. And I had witnessed, just to keep it sort of trigger warning for anyone listening, just if you don't want to listen to this, heads up, trauma informed. There, just give people a minute to go. I had witnessed the slaughter of animals as a child in a ritual. And it was black magic, and it was voodoo. And it's a very odd thing for a Westerner to say, but I trust it implicitly, and I've had people from the area be able to confirm that my memories as a child were too accurate, unless that it actually happened. So these animals revisited me, and a lot of healing happened. they were able to tell me that their lives were not taken in vain, that we had a connection. They were able to tell me that I had shut down a lot of my access. We don't actually lose our intuition, I believe. It's always there. It's just a matter of whether we trust it and we act on it and we choose to access it. But based on being a very young child and witnessing this, I did not have the emotional maturity or skills I do as an adult to cope. So I didn't want to see, hear, feel, or experience anything like that again.
Blocking it.
Exactly. You got it. In one word, simple, block. But they were here in that moment during that guided communication to say, this is your life's work and it's time to get to work. So it was a very significant visitation because, and I'm just getting those truth shivers up and down my body, that
Which is a sign of intuition. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Deep knowing. And they're still there. They haven't gone away of this is why you're here, And so in 2011 to 2014, my journey was to continue with my personal work, which is so important, I feel, not only as a professional practitioner of interspecies communication, but also personally, because any personal work I do has a ripple effect in everything that I do, including my ability to use my intuition and trust my intuition and recognize how my intuition comes in. And so say, okay, I can trust that. So I studied on and off with a teacher. Not everyone has to study because my belief is that we are all born intuitive and we are an animal species and we are part of nature and we have become artificially disconnected through our evolution. And that's what got me started as a Animal and Nature Communicator. And now I'm in my 9th year of professional practice and have really honed in on the last 3 years more on advocacy and sacred activism and education. That has become really important to me. Yeah. So it's just my story, and
beautiful.
Everybody can approach it just wherever they're at.
Well, thank you for sharing. And there's a few things I'd love to touch on in your story. First, thank you for sharing. I could sense there was an emotional component to it when you talked about, that trauma that you lived, and then the animals coming to you, telling you like, no, we didn't die in vain. And kind of like that was part of your healing. I would understand. And that's kind of something. And then we talked about body shivers, and it's something I want to touch on because when it comes to intuition, how it speaks to us, it in various ways. And one of those can be those tingling sensation, that body shivers we get. And I find that for me, intuition speaks a lot intertwined with emotions. And we'll touch on that in a bit about like fear versus intuition, because how do you discern what is an emotion, what is intuition? Because some of that intuitive knowledge can come in the form or be triggered by some sort of an emotion as well. So that's something I'd like for us to touch on as well. And I love how you said that it pulled you in, because I feel like that was the case for me as well in my own intuitive journey. It's like you just feel that call, it pulls you in. And I don't know for you, but the more you try to block it or resist it, it just keeps knocking and it becomes louder. And then things will start happening in your life and you got to be like, hey, listen up. So I wanted to touch a little bit on that. And most importantly, when you mentioned that intuition is about observation and trust and trusting yourself and being in stillness and observant. So awareness, I think, is a keyword that I coach people on, is to develop that awareness. And I'm glad you mentioned that you had a teacher, although yes, you can develop it on your own. Sometimes it's nice to have a guide or someone to kind of like give us that confidence, I would say, or like, and that's what you did for me with animal communication anyway. So I just want to touch on that it's nice when you have that validation or confirmation from someone who you might see as like, oh, this woman, like she talks to animals and she's telling me I can do it too. So that gave me confidence and trust and being able to compare notes. And I was like, okay, I can do that too, not to the level that you do it, but that was reassuring and allowed me to trust my own intuitive abilities more.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Whether it's intuitive interspecies communication or intuition in general, I love what you're doing with these podcasts and your business, because finding an ethical teacher who can support you, and a community where you know you're not alone is really, those are two things that I think are key. Key supports. It doesn't mean you have to engage, and you can engage at the level you wish, you know, depending on your introversion extroversion scale. But it's nice knowing you're not alone and feeling in community, because humans are a social species.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for touching on that. That's beautiful. And so it brings me to my question. A question that I ask my guests here is, how do you use your intuition in your practice? I mean, for you, it's very obvious in terms of animal communication, but do you use it also in your personal life, or do you have other moments you'd like to share of how you use your intuition?
Yeah, I guess it's pretty clear that I use it in my professional practice, because my practice is intuitive interspecies communication. I mean, the word intuitive is right there. Excuse me. I just want to touch a little bit on the practice, and then I'll touch definitely on the personal. I think with the practice, the thing is that everyone says, I wish animals could speak. And I'm like, but they do. We don't share the same spoken language, but we all have this universal language. We all have this universal language of the heart, of intuition. And I think my intuitive journey, what I learned by choosing to follow intuitive interspecies communication, is that we live in society, at least in North America, or the people around me in my community, where my imagination, my creativity, my emotions, my deep feeling was not fostered and encouraged. If anything, it was criticized, rejected. And it told me as a young child that that was not okay to be that person. And so studying this and my own, coupled with my own healing journey, helped me to realize that we are senders and receivers. And, you know, this is just natural and innate to our beings. And we have different levels of intelligence within us. And why not access them all? And so it still amazes people, you know, oh, you can talk to animals. And it's like, and you can too. I want to say it's not a special gift. It feels special when when everyone does it, but I'm not gifted. I may be more practiced, and practice in any language helps you build your fluency, build your trust, build your confidence. It's just natural. And that applies to intuition. And then there's a lot of people that are just very logical, rational, scientific, and there isn't a place for intuition. And there's a book I'm reading right now that I just want to mention. It's by Dr. Jill Bolte, I think, and not Bolte. People may know of her. Her story went her TED Talk is one of maybe in the top 10. She's a neurosurgeon or a neurologist, and she had a stroke, and she wrote about this.
Yes.
And it really changed how she chose to live. And her latest book, Whole Brain Living, is all about, and I love this because this is helpful in my intuition. It talks about how we've been living in a left and right brain hemisphere, and one is feeling and thinking and one is logic. But the reality is they both think and they both feel. So there's 4 quadrants to the brain. So I can't share enough on that, but that's another tool I would recommend if you want to know about a scientific approach, a neurological approach.
Absolutely.
And in terms of personally, yes, I call myself an intuitive nerd. I love learning. I love information. I love conversations. I love facts. I love research. And I think what I see is actually a marriage between my father and my mother, the emotion and the logic. And I feel like I bridge both worlds. What I've learned is, for me, being me, the logic stuff is so helpful for planning and practical things that we do as humans. But in terms of being me, living me, honoring the call, knowing what the call is, and actual decisions, it's the intuition and the heart. And human design, for me, affirmed, because in that model, and again, everyone has to put it through their own truth filter, that the mind is not a decision-making center.
Yeah.
And when I was given that, I felt such freedom.
Yeah.
Because when there is that tug of war, I find it is between these centers. And if you follow places like heart math, you know, global coherence of the heart, and the energy and the power of the heart is so much greater than the brain and many other centers, and how it's connected to the gut. And that physical aspect of intuition. So how do I use intuition beyond my practice, having touched on it everywhere? And I'm as human as they come. I will find myself, my husband says, you have no troubles making decisions. You know what you want. For a good part of my life, I'm very clear on what I want. But there are some things, because of my conditioning, that is so ingrained, so deep, that I may not even be aware of. There is this internal struggle. Do I, don't I? And when I don't know, I don't until I know. And usually it's because there's some voice inside of me that is not my authentic voice, but is that conglomeration of conditioning that is fighting back, is the human mind that is given there for a purpose, that keeps me safe and tries to interpret things. But in the case of knowing my true desires, it does not.
Yeah. So since we're on that topic, let's talk about if someone wants to develop their own intuitive abilities in terms of animal communication, what are the tips and tools or advices you would give them? And then let's talk about those blocks, or how to kind of like navigate. What are those tips that you give them of like, this is intuition, this is not, versus fear?
So that's a big topic, but we will touch on some highlights today. So, you know, how do I recognize that I'm receiving information and communicate, and what's going to get in my way, and what can I do to address that? And that is the nutshell of the foundation of reigniting or remembering ourselves. I think the first thing that I need to say is that conditioning, that busyness, that human doing, we live in our heads, and we don't live in our bodies, and we don't necessarily pay attention to the rest of the information. So the first thing is slow down and get out of your head and drop into your body and drop into your heart. And that can be uncomfortable for people, because things will bubble up in their awareness. Generally, I find that most people are really good at sending intuitive interspecies communication messages to their animals, because nature, because animals in nature, the rest of animals, remember we're an animal too, all they understand is energy. They recognize source energy. They understand our words. Sometimes they understand the tone, they understand the intent, the motivation, the body language, because they receive it telepathically, they receive it energetically. So it's always like, how do they know? It's because they're receiving our thoughts. They're receiving thoughts or energy. That's how your cat knew that you were going somewhere. You know, it's like, we didn't tell them, and it's like, but it's all around them. So getting still is something. Practicing listening. Humans aren't necessarily good listeners. We're always thinking about how to respond, or wanting to share our experience of that. The other thing I recommend people do is start paying attention to how you receive intuition in your life right now. Who's that ringing the doorbell? You feel like that package is coming in the mail. When is it coming?
Yeah.
Who's at the end of that ringing phone? Pay attention to, if you drive or use your bicycle, how do you get from point A to point B? I want you to focus on circumstances and situations in your life and see where you're already using intuition. And you may realize you're using it a lot more than you had awareness on. The second thing that I encourage people to do is, how do you receive it? So when I work with people in private mentoring, I'll give them a list of, I'll just say something like strawberries, the ocean, a bubble bath. And I want you in those moments to notice, how do you receive that information? How does it come into you?
Mhm.
So I had one woman that says, oh, I do this, I do this, I do this, and I do this, I do this. I said, 4 are your 5 things you see, you receive information visually. She's like, oh yeah, you're right. So sometimes it's so close, we can't even see it. So sometimes even sharing it with someone else, they can bounce it back to us. Because if we're already receiving it in our unique style, it means that's really strong in us. Just like I'm a good writer, I'm a good speaker, but speaking comes much more easily to me than writing.
Mhm.
So a lot of people talk about the clairs. You know,
Yes.
we have our 5 physical senses. We also have our 6 physical senses, you know, the 6th sense being intuition.
Mhm.
But I go beyond that. The animals use me like a database. And what I say in intuition is to be open to any information, however subtle it comes in. It can be memories, it can be colors, it can be songs.
Dreams.
It is dreams. It can communicate itself in the best way that it can reach you, that you're going to understand it and receive it. So don't limit yourself to the clairs, because you may be missing out on something.
Mhm.
Because when you recognize it, when you run into those blocks, the second part of your question. So what are blocks?
Yes.
Fear, overthinking, second guessing, doubt, not trusting.
Mhm.
And it can sound like, you know, oh, I'm scared of what I'm going to get. I'm scared of
Yeah.
what I'm going to get. I'm scared of not what I'm going to get.
Yeah.
Or did that really happen? I'm not sure that came from the cat.
Yeah.
Or maybe I made that up. It's all in
Yeah.
my head.
The second guessing is the worst. You just stay in that
Yeah.
loop.
And I say, when you feel blocked, when you have the questions, that is a block. Just recognize whatever, however it manifests in you. A block is like I always attribute it to, like, you know, if you're driving on a street and then there's this physical roadblock.
Mhm.
But in terms of intuition, it looks like a roadblock, but I can walk through it, over it, around it, or under it. It's just an illusion that there is an actual block. And the illusion comes from my thinking human
Mhm.
mind,
Mhm.
which does serve purposes. I'm not trying to eradicate it.
Mhm.
So the first thing, as I say, so be still, learn to listen, learn to understand how you are already using intuition in your life, and recognize how it comes to you. The second thing to do for blocks is recognize what your blocks are. What do you default to?
Mhm.
So that it makes it so much easier. It's like, oh yeah, I'm a visual person and I'm seeing this image. Okay, that's likely I can trust it. Oh, I have this block saying, you know, I'm making it up in my head. Okay, there's a block. So how do you get over the blocks? That's the third part of your question. And I'm really doing very general things, but sometimes the general things are the simple things. They sound simple, but they're harder to do.
Yes.
They sound simple,
Simple
but
but
harder to
not
put
easy.
into
Not
practice.
easy.
Exactly, you got it. So what I say is, you want to have practices in your life. You can experiment with them, try them out. What works for one person doesn't mean it works for you. You got to find your own way of things that bring you to stillness. And when I say the dreaded M word, and what do I mean by dreaded M word, is meditation. People are like, no,
Yeah.
don't tell me to meditate. I'm a
Meditate.
terrible meditator.
Yeah,
I
but
hate
I'm
meditating. And they're like, I always have thoughts. And I'm like, well, there's all kinds of different types of meditation. I have been a meditator since 2005. I generally meditate twice a day for 20 minutes. I'm not perfect. I have thoughts. It's the discipline of doing it. It's like putting money in the bank. I benefit from the discipline of doing it, not as a punishment, but as a routine.
Yeah.
But there's so many other things you can do that you might prefer if meditation. My other one is walking in the woods with my dog.
That's my favorite.
Being in nature.
Mhm.
Walking, and I literally walk things out of me and things arise in me. It's kind of interesting.
Mhm.
Being with animals. People will say, oh, you know, when I do yoga or I pray or I meditate, they come to me. And I'm like, that's because you're in your being energy. That's
Your
because you're in your
energy.
stillness energy. That's because you're in your true self energy.
Mhm.
And they're attracted to that. For some people, it's journaling or morning pages by Julia Cameron, and just dumping it all out and clearing the head and getting it out of that cycle. For some people, it's music. For some people, it's movement. They're very
Mhm.
kinesthetic. And
Yep.
as they move, they process. So I don't have the whole laundry list, but the reality is, how do you receive intuition? Recognizing your blocks, and then practices that help you become more familiar, more comfortable with being in stillness, because the reality is that conditioning and that thinking head is so loud that those quiet, subtle bubblings of intuition are often overridden. And so we miss them or we override them. And that's my basic 101 to interspecies, intuitive interspecies communication.
I love it. It is so detailed. I hope people were taking notes and probably pausing and taking notes. And you touch on so many things. And like you said, it's different for everyone. And that's one thing that I approach in my coaching, is like be able to encourage exploration of that. And it comes with, and so no wonder that when you had your moment of you called it a not a breakdown but a break open, and then you start your own healing journey of self-awareness and getting to know yourself, that you start to realize all those things, because it's not a one size fits all. And that's one thing I touch on in another podcast. Funny you mentioned the Claris, because another podcast with Heather Alice Shea, which is my mentor, and that's one thing that she touches on, is the different clairs, how we receive intuition, either like in terms of like a visual image and so on. And it's kind of like paying attention to that. So, and I just want to read a quote that's from your website. You say, "We can all speak with the rest of the animal kingdom." And I like that you see the rest of the animal kingdom, because we're animals too. I'm a biology teacher and we're part of that kingdom too. And the natural world, and that we are all naturally intuitive communicators.
Thank you for quoting that. I think the thing, and I mentioned it earlier already, that I'm not special, I'm just practiced, is accessibility. I want people to know that intuitive interspecies communication is accessible. It is innate, and it's our birthright. We're born with it.
Yeah.
And by ignoring our intuition, we ignore so much information that we are given. And the last thing I want to say about intuitive interspecies communication is, because there's so many roots to intuition and owning it and becoming more confident and practiced with it. Because most people come to me and they think, I'm going to learn to speak to animals or to nature. What they never anticipate, and I can never capture, and I won't even be able to capture for you, Chantal, and your audience, but you've had some experiences directly, and you need a direct experience, is how much your world opens up when you open up to the world around you through intuition. And people talk about the changes that happen, and I'm like, it's much more than intuitive interspecies communication. And specifically around communication with the rest of the animal kingdom in the natural world, we live in an ecosystem where humanity still sees itself as superior, where we put ourselves on top, and we exploit, rather than being part of the ecosystem where we see the interconnectedness and the interdependence. And nature will live on without us. People worry about the state of the world. I have no doubts that nature can live without humanity, but we cannot live without nature. And so how do we collaborate? How do we collaborate? We need to look at being part of the ecosystem, not the ecosystem and all about us. So there are many, many gifts in following the path of intuition, whether it's and the animals in nature know so much, and we really don't give them enough credit.
Yeah, so you touched on the last question I was going to ask you. How can we use that interspecies communication to help us restore our planet? And I love how you mentioned the egosystem versus our ecosystem, and realizing that we all interrelated, interconnected. And one thing I teach about in my, when I teach biology to high school students, is that, if I ask you what animal do you want to be? Oh, I want to be dolphin or the bald eagle or the fierce tiger. I'm like, nobody wants to be the worm or the fungi. But we forget that these are, and especially fungus, when you start looking at the fungi world and the systems,
Mycelium.
yeah, the systems with the trees underground and how they communicate, and the fascinating world of how mushrooms also can have a lot of healing properties. I use a lot of mushroom cacao in the morning. I replace that with instead of coffee, and I love it. And so when you start to discover the power of all these different species, and you're like, you need the fungi and the worm as much as you need the bald eagle if you want that bald eagle to survive, and how we that speaks for itself, or how we treat our planet, how we treat our soil. If we, we cut trees, which we need to, we have to kind of like understand that balance of like taking but also leaving. And in terms of indigenous teachings, is they say that when we take something from the land, we're borrowing from our children. So how do we give back or keep that ecosystem from running, and all our relations? That's another teachings from the first people, and all our relations, our relations to self, our intuition, to others, and to the rest of the planet. And I find that what you're doing and all the projects that you do with like the White Lion Foundation and the Heart Foundation kind of touch on that as well, in terms of restoration and helping our world be a better place, right?
Mhm. So I think what I'd like to say about that, Chantal, and to
Yes,
everyone
please.
listening is the rest of the animal kingdom and nature can definitely be master teachers and healers, guides. Pay attention to who crosses your path, whether it's dreams, radio,
Mhm.
television, animals that don't live on the physical plane that may be extinct, or what we perceive as mythical animals who live in other dimensions, being open to there being a lot more than living in a 3D existence. So if I were to wave a magic wand, I've been an advocate my whole life without really realizing it. And then more recently, I realized I've done advocacy in so many capacities for the human animals, and then moved into a larger domain. And it really is to support and restore right relationship with nature, humanity's right relationship with nature, for
Mhm.
for interspecies peace and unity, for
Mhm.
all the wisdom of the natural world that we have lost while we have created technology that is beneficial. We have also lost foundational natural wisdom. So how can intuitive interspecies help us? And I'll talk about the two projects you alluded to, the Heart Pride and the Global White Lion Protection Trust. A lot of what I do is what's called sacred activism. And I use the word, called myself an advocate a lot. I didn't like to call myself an activist. And I wasn't even sure if there's a difference, but there is. An advocate does a lot of listening, and activist takes a lot of action. That's a very generalized. But an activist is often putting all their energy resisting against something that they don't want. So there's fear, anger, and rage, and
Yeah.
desperation, and powerlessness. And then I came across, not mine, you can read Andrew Harvey and many others, about sacred activism, which is a combination of coming from a place of unconditional love and respect, and focusing our energies on building in the world what we want to see.
Absolutely.
So it is both energetic coupled with conscious action, because any actions that we take at a quantum level will have an impact on the physical world. So some of the projects that you mentioned that I am part of, it's not my project. The Global White Lion Protection Trust is been founded by Linda Tucker, and they protect the white lions of South Africa in Timbavati, which is the only area in the entire world where they are native to. And they are technically extinct on paper because they have been pillaged and taken and put in captivity around the world. And she reintroduced Pride's a conservation scientific project, but also uses intuitive interspecies communication to work with the lions, who are believed by the kings and queens of Africa of past to be the star lions who fell from the sky. And Timbavati actually means lions who fell from the stars. And there is a lot of information. Now I'm getting goosebumps. We're taking turns about the significance that Indigenous people talk about with white animals, the white eagle, the white bull, the white snake,
Bear.
the white elephant, the white lions, that they are here for a reason, both as a support system and a cautionary warning to humanity. So she does some incredible work. The Heart Pride, I'm a member of, I'm a founding member. It was created in July 2020. People can now join. It is a collaboration between Winter Worsthorn of Animal Talk Africa and Linda Tucker of the Global White Lion Protection Trust. And basically, there are different levels of membership. It opens twice a year, and the next registration starts for 3 weeks on May the 5th. Okay. And did you want me to talk about the Animal Communication Practice Group before we wrap up?
Yes, please. And I'll add those links. All that can be found on your website as well. I just want to mention that will be included in the bio at Chrisitine Noble Seller and .com, right? Yep. And yes, please mention that's part of something that you offer as one of your services, right?
Yeah. And I mentioned these even though you might see the links, because it gives you kind of like a human, of course, connection to it. Yeah. So one of my own sacred activisms projects is the Animal Communication Practice Group. A practice group is for people who have taken a basic level of animal communication, often called a beginner's and introductory or foundational course. I'm not offering that, but you can have taken it with any other teacher, right up to professionals who are practicing. I offer this every other month. The next one is May 6th. And the first 3 have been with animals in care in animal shelters. So basically, we speak to these animals, we speak to them and the caregiver, and all the financial proceeds are donated to support the care of them. And then the last 2 that will happen this year will be with the wildlife sanctuaries as well. So really, it's understanding animals are in care, supporting them, advancing intuitive interspecies communication, but supporting not only the animals in care, but the organizations who provide the animals in care, so that they can provide better care, they can have the finances, and those that are wanting to practice and build up their intuition around their confidence, they're getting confirmation, trusting it. It's a really great way to do that. And that's the importance of a practice group.
Absolutely. And while you were saying that, something came to me intuitively. I just want to give a shout out to my friend Barb, who is, she was just in Costa Rica in shelters and giving a lot of her time and energy and money to those shelters. She rescued a dog as well, I believe, from Costa Rica. We call them the Schmups. And so I just want to give a shout out to her. I think she would be interested in what you just offered. So shout out to Barb, an unsung hero. I find out a lot of people around us do a lot of great things, and they might not be on social media or on the news, but sometimes it's nice to underline their work as well. So I just wanted to take a moment to do that.
Thank you for sharing about Barb. And what I want to say about that is, we don't do it for fame. We don't do it to be noticed. We do it because the heart calls. And the people that have the most fame may be known for what they do, but there are so many unsung heroes, as you talk about, so many people around the world doing good deeds, doing good service, just out of their generosity of their heart. Yes.
And this is kind of the goal of this podcast. So if any of you are listening and you feel like you have a story to share of your own intuitive journey, please reach out to me. And I'd love to hear your story and maybe have you on my podcast, because this is what it's about. This is for the people to share their stories, to hear about other people's stories, their intuitive stories, and understand that intuition is for all and everyone can access it. It's just a matter of time and putting, I guess, the energy and the mindfulness, the awareness into it as well. So
somebody said a long time ago, it wasn't me, but what we focus on grows. Yes. So focusing on intuition, our intuition will, and we're not broken and we don't lose it, I believe, but we can get disconnected or distracted.
Yeah. I find that I find for me, it's kind of like, riding a bicycle or a certain sport activity you haven't done in a while. I know for myself, when I go skiing, like downhill skiing or
Yeah, yeah.
downhill mountain biking, the first runs, I'm like, "Ugh, why am I doing this?" And then after a couple, I'm like, woohoo, I want more. This is amazing. So yeah, sometimes it's kind of like tricky to get back into it, but the more you're into it, and as you said, you mentioned that community aspect, I find is key of finding that your tribe or finding like-minded people and sharing. So, Christine, thank you so much. Is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap this podcast?
No, I just want to thank you for the invitation, this opportunity for the conversation.
Yes.
I'm so excited about all the shout outs that you did today, how you beautifully wove this conversation, this podcast that you're offering, this support and this community. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Thanks everyone for tuning in. You'll find all the juicy details in the bio. Please reach out to Christine if you want to start talking to your animal. This is good. I recommend it strongly. So take care of yourself with love and light. Bye for now.